a Thursday. If your Thursday has already been going, then welcome again. How's everybody doing today? Good? If anybody wants to like randomly break out into song and have some piano accompaniment, feel free. I will not stop you. A piano has appeared, so I think allegedly they use this room for music recitals. So we'll probably be seeing more of that kind of thing over the semester. It gives a certain ambiance to the room. So does anybody have any questions from last class? By the way, I love it when you ask me questions, just because, you know, it gives me something to kind of think about and gives me something to kind of dig into sometimes. Anybody? Okay, I got one. Hi. Yeah. I think it depends on which sphere you're looking in. I mean, certainly most commercial graphic designers who, you know, work in advertising or work in those sorts of industries probably don't consider themselves to be artists. That's not to say that design in general doesn't have a lot of overlap with art making, especially in the realm of digital art, because the tools that we use are identical. So in the post that I sent out, I think that one of the sort of guiding posts that I use in a time where, in today's time, it's actually really hard to tell in some cases if something is art or design. And I don't think too hard about it because I don't feel like those distinctions are as important as they used to be. But one thing that we can look at is the artist's intent. You know, did the artist intend to kind of creatively express themselves or kind of take a expressive kind of position, or did they intend to persuade somebody through like a political poster or an advertisement? So that type of thinking about it can be somewhat useful. I guess, you know, I actually used to be a professor of design in my previous job, so this is an issue that I've thought about like a lot. And I think that there are a lot of designers out there in the world who are also artists, and in that sort of group of people, I think that they tend to think of design as their day job and art as the thing that they do that they want to do. And so I can think of several digital artists that fall into that category of people that have a really significant art career and make art, but they also have, you know, a job doing data visualization or a job doing, you know, traditional kind of commercial graphic design. So yeah, I think there's so many examples of artists that kind of cross over in those areas now. Any other questions? Okay, so today we're going to kind of pivot a little bit. I'm glad we got to spend some time talking about history. Pretty much starting today, we're going to be into the now and into the present. So when I show you examples of digital art, they're probably not going to be more than 10 years old at most. I try to keep things like, you know, within the sort of like five year on the long end, and then into like, you know, 2 or 3 years, really. I try not to show digital art that's older than my computer. Basically, it's my sort of dividing line there. So we're going to be looking at a lot of stuff that's really like current, as in almost, you know, in the present. When we look at the lecture today, we're really going to be thinking less about the sort of outside world and what's going on in the world as far as culture and art being made. And we're going to really focus on kind of a technical issue, and that is we're going to answer the question, what is a digital image? So we're going to answer that through cats, obviously. So yeah, as we think about what is a digital image, I mean, obviously we have a common sense answer for this, and it's like, yeah, we're like looking at it right now. Thanks, Meg. No, that's not what I'm talking about. We're going to talk about kind of what it is at a more fundamental level. So there are two types of digital images that we're going to talk about. We're going to look at a few slides, and then I'm going to show you a few examples kind of from my own, computer, and some of the examples are actually from my own work. So we're going to look at this idea of raster-based and vector-based images. Vector images are typically, as you can see in that little graphic of that cat, it looks like he's doing a little grooming job there. Vectors are fundamentally points between lines. And what that tends to produce is a very graphic image. What do I mean by graphic? Usually graphic images are actually referred to based on the traditions of printmaking. But when people refer to something that looks graphic, they refer to something that has solid colors, lines, shapes, that kind of stuff, where you don't see a lot of difference in the gray of that cat, right? You can't see any shadows or highlights unless they're drawn in as shapes, usually. So that's definitely a great example of a vector image. You see vector images commonly being used in graphic design. You also see them, there's quite a bit of art made with vector images. I use them quite a bit in my own work. And I think it's also worth noting that vector images are kind of the foundational technology of most 3D 3D modelers and programs. So vectors are really all about describing something mathematically at the fundamental level. So can you describe a point and then another point in coordinates, usually Cartesian coordinates, and can you then draw a curve between them, in this case based on two other lines called handles. And that's all stuff that can be expressed through numbers. And because of that, vector images can be much more flexible than raster images. Raster images, they're properly called raster images. Most people call them pixel-based images. Raster is sort of an arcane technical term. So raster images are made up entirely of pixels, and they're generally made up of code that is machine readable, meaning that we have software tools to edit raster images for us. And I've never heard, except for this glitch assignment that we're doing, I have never heard of somebody editing a raster image through code. That's just kind of on a different level. No, I mean, people can do it, and people do it, but it's like super specialized and kind of like way into the high nerdery. So it's not something that you would typically see people do. And I'll show you in a few minutes, why. We'll actually kind of look at some of these files under the hood, as it were. So what is the difference from a kind of useful perspective or a sort of practical perspective? Well, the main difference is that raster images can encompass photographic detail, right? So any image that has pixels is, if we have it at a high enough resolution or a high enough number of pixels, we're going to be able to see things like shadows and highlights and continuous tone arrangements where something fades from one color to another. And we can capture that all really well. With vector images, the sort of big deal about vector images is that because they're mathematically described, they're infinitely scalable. And by the way, when I say infinite, I mean infinite, like actually infinite. You can take something that's the size of a postage stamp in a vector image and blow it up to the size of a billboard, and it will look exactly the same. So with something that's a raster image, you can do the same thing, and guess what? You can look at the pixels, because those pixels are like a finite thing. We'll talk extensively about the idea of scaling raster images. That kind of becomes something that people have been developing algorithms to get better at that. And to a certain extent, it is certainly better than it used to be, but at a sort of very fundamental level, like, them's the breaks. That's kind of what you're dealing with. You're always going to have the limitation of however many pixels you have in your file. And you're going to, at some point, you'll hit a wall of not being able to scale it up and maintain your image quality. So let's kind of review some of these pros and cons between these two image types. Vector images, they are infinitely scalable. They're super precise. If you want to design a building or make a medical device that you're going to implant into somebody's body, definitely make it a vector or a 3D vector image or file. Works great for illustrations and graphics design. The other cool thing about vectors, which is one of the things that I really like about vectors, is that you can have an incredibly complex vector file, and it might be like a megabyte. And that would be a really, really complicated vector file. As you've probably noticed with just maybe the photos on your phone, I can have a couple months of living and just being myself, taking pictures of everything, and then I've got several gigabytes of data that I have to move off my phone, right? I think we've all probably had that experience of like filling up our phone with photos and videos and that kind of stuff. And that's because pixels take up more space. So I guess one of the other good things about some vector formats, like the SVG format, is that it's actually readable by a web browser. So a lot of contemporary web designers are using SVG file formats because when you're designing for the web, which we won't really get into in this class, but there are classes in the art department that deal with this. You might have something on your computer here, like let's say maybe these little icons, which I can almost guarantee you are SVG files. They're going to be a certain size if I look at them on my desktop computer with my web browser. And if I look at them on my phone, they're going to be a different size, right? So that idea of using scalable vector graphics for web design has kind of taken off. And that's another reason why people use vector graphics. Some of the cons of vector-based graphics, some formats need special software, and that's totally true. There are not that many software programs out there that are capable of dealing with vectors. Some that come to mind are Adobe Illustrator, which of course then you're kind of in the Adobe evil verse of renewing your subscription. Inkscape is an open source vector illustration program that's quite nice. And yeah, there just aren't a whole lot of programs out there that work with vector files. So it's almost impossible to get realistic looking blends. Adobe Illustrator has some capability to create like gradients and blends. But you probably have to like study that for a lifetime to figure out how to really make it work. It's really hard. And as that goes, is that continuous tone doesn't exist. So you'll always have a certain kind of like vector look to your work. You're never going to get something that looks like a photograph out of a vector illustration program because it's just not possible. Okay, so moving on to raster images, which in this class, we're going to be dealing primarily with raster images. I know several of you are moving on to other things like 3D design and graphic design, so I want to make sure that I talk about vector images within this context. But in this class, we're going to be dealing mostly with raster images and pixels. So I think, the pros are that it is great for photos and photographic imagery, which is a huge, huge chunk of our visual culture, right? They render continuous tone. The compression of, remember how I just said that digital images take up a ton of space, like on your phone? Well, the good news is that compression algorithms have also gotten a lot better, so they're taking up less space than they used to, and but they still take up space, even when they're compressed. So yeah, there are lots of compression formats available that make it less onerous to kind of move around a bunch of images. The cons of using raster images are, just to kind of review, they're not super scalable. It's very difficult to say, maybe I'm going to take the low quality image from my phone and make a billboard out of it. And if you probably went up to that billboard, you would see like my face. It would be like, this is my eye blob, and it's full of pixels, right? So you would have a hard time really kind of getting to those extremes in scale with pixels. We're going to talk about some strategies to scale images successfully, but I do want to kind of just hammer that. I'll say this for probably a couple of days in lecture at least, that you can't invent pixels that aren't there. If you want to scale something up, you can't just like wave a literal magic wand and say, be more high resolution. There are algorithms to help us do that, but all of those algorithms have kind of tells or artifacts that creep into the process. So moving forward, we are indeed going to be working with raster images. When we think about raster images, we have a bunch of file formats, and you may or may not have heard of a few of these. Probably the three most common in today's sort of computing, world would be, I would put JPEG first in terms of commonness, TIFF second, and then PNG third. Two of those formats, out of TIFF, JPEG, and PNG, two of those are known as kind of internet formats, meaning that they're formats that were really developed for moving images across networks, and so because of that, they're compressed and they're smaller. They tend to have smaller file sizes. TIFF is like a kind of high quality, like if you're a professional photographer, you're saving all your images as TIFFs. And then of course there's a lot more. There's probably 30 pixel-based image types that are in common circulation. It gets kind of ridiculous. I think we really only need to focus on these three, because these are the ones that 99% of your travels along the internet and everywhere else, these are the three that you would be most likely to see. So when we think about images that we're finding from a web page, or even just like an image bank online, really what we want to think about is pixel size. And we're going to talk more about the whole idea of resolution, but because we're living in the internet age, more and more you're seeing pixel size being the kind of dominant form of describing the size of an image. So we'll talk about that more when we get into Photoshop. I don't think we'll probably get into it today. But basically, I guess, just to think about this idea of pixel size, pixel size is nice, and one of the reasons I like to use pixel size, it doesn't necessarily conform to like a print size. And lol, I can't even find like a printed piece of paper. I found one. So with print size, at some point, somebody made an image that was, 3.5 by 8.5, or maybe 11, normal print size, right? It's got inches. It exists. It's real. And this idea of print size and then saying, oh, it's 300 dpi or 100 dpi or whatever, it doesn't really say anything about how big the image is, or it doesn't say that in a way that people can really relate to. So the point of all this, we'll talk about resolution a lot more, but the point of all this is that I actually find that even professionally, if I am sending images to like a museum or something for them to review, they usually ask for it in pixel size. They'll say, we need an image that's at least 1,000 pixels, or we need an image that's at least 3,000 pixels wide, right? And so if you're dealing with purely digital environments and not having to, God forbid, actually print something, I'm kind of joking, by the way. I think printmaking is really cool, but it's kind of a special thing, like making prints. Pretty much, I would say, working in pixel size makes a lot of sense. So, so you can see here, this is just kind of a simulation of an image that is 256 by 256 pixels. It actually is a 256 by 256 image thing. And it's pretty straightforward. This is 128 by 128 pixels. And you can see it's exactly half the size, right? So that's pretty awesome. Another place you'll see pixel size a lot is if you look at, let's see, what should I search for? Of course, Google co-opted my technical term with a phone. Yeah, in general, if you're looking out on Google search, you will see a pixel size. So here are the pixel sizes right there. It's 462 by 280. That's a pretty small image. If I wanted to get a larger image, and we'll deal with this again probably in the next lecture, I can shift this to large, and it will come up with larger images. So here's a 2,000 by 1,333 image. Now, if I had a 128 pixel image and a 2,000 by 1,000 pixel image, which image am I going to be able to zoom in more on? Definitely the image with more pixels, right? So the cool thing about pixel size is that it just gives you like a really simple way to say, this image is bigger than this other image. Where with resolution, I think the idea of resolution and print size can be really confusing. So in any case, we are going to be talking about this idea of print size, resolution, pixel size all the time while we're working in Photoshop. So one thing that I wanted to show you is sort of what some of these formats look like from a code perspective. And you can see here, this is actually, let me open it up. So this image, not that it really super matters a lot, but this image is the Nyan Cat meme from the olden days. I chose it because it's a really small image. It looks like it's, oh, and by the way, if you go into column view in the Finder of Mac OS, if you're on a PC, you can just go to Properties, right-click and go to Properties. It will actually tell you what the pixel size of the image is in that description, which can be super useful. So this is what Nyan Cat looks like under the hood. And if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm not going to be messing with that anytime soon, I would say you are so completely right. Why would you? It is not human readable. This is machine code, basically. This is encoded so that it's as easy and fast as possible for your PC to interpret it and make an image like that. And also it's compressed. So it's not anywhere near what we would expect to deal with as human beings. To contrast that, I'm going to show you a vector file. And if anybody knows HTML or other markup languages, you might be thinking that this might look slightly similar to HTML. And that's because it is very close. It is XML. SVG is actually a fork of XML. And you can see here that we're getting into something that might be much more reasonable, or something that you can at least kind of look at it and figure certain things out about it, right? Like, hey, this is this is a style here, and it has certain fills, it has an opacity setting, it has, rules and a stroke rule. So that's why SVG files are commonly used as sort of a source file for interactive graphics. And you might see these on a web page, like interactive data visualizations. And that's because people who are coders can actually get in and say, hey, PHP, or hey, some other scripting language, get into this file and pick all the strokes out and change them to a different color based on my data, or whatever. So SVG files are really kind of great for that. Goes way beyond the scope of this class, but I did want to kind of mention that. So thinking about maybe more detailed explanation of the difference between raster and vector, I went ahead and I took sort of the same image, and I added some type to it in Adobe Illustrator. And I also rasterized it. So I made a raster-based copy of this image. And this is just kind of a reject from one of my projects. When I'm working with code and making images, the cool thing about code is that you can generate like hundreds of images in a couple of minutes. And then you have all these like beautiful rejects. So that's one of the pros there. So you can see this image is at what's called screen resolution. So if I look at this image in the Finder, we can see that it's at 650 by 950. So this scale that it's at now, this would be like equivalent to the resolution of if you saw this on the internet in a web page and it was this size, and you did a screen cap. This would be what you get, okay? So it's screen resolution. And if anybody's curious about that number, it's 72 or 96, depending on what system you're working with. 72 is kind of the default. So you can see, we can zoom in, to a point, right? And it's like, this was kind of readable. It's kind of okay. But certainly we go to a certain point and we kind of can't, we hit the wall of pixels, right? We can't go any further. And we can zoom in as far as we want, but we'll just get bigger looking pixels because those pixels are sort of just baked into the structure of the image. That's what the image is. So contrast that with the vector version. And you can see we just get lots and lots of zoom. And right now, if I were in Adobe Illustrator, I could zoom in a little bit further. I could zoom in quite a bit further. I'm just hitting the wall of how the preview program won't let me zoom in any further because it's like, what are you even looking at? You're crazy. So it's a really great sort of illustration of why you would or wouldn't want to use one of these formats. I guess the good news is that in the modern sort of Adobe sphere, this particular example is something that Adobe a couple of years ago thought they should address. And so if you save something as a PDF now, out of any Adobe product, you can combine raster and vector. So a really common strategy for people using Photoshop is to keep their images in pixel format and then to make their type vector. And if you export it as a PDF, you can keep your type in vector format to keep this from happening, right? Because this is not, usually, this is undesirable. So thinking towards glitching, one way of getting kind of interesting images out of some of the images that we're working with is Certainly one way is using a software program. That's like the kind of common sense way that most people deal with. There's also, a whole other category of magic in sort of making your own glitch art. And so we're going to talk about that just a tiny bit. I have a couple of different images that I wanted to kind of work off of. So I have two images that are very different. I have the Nyan Cat image that we already saw, which is very small. It's 696 by 385 pixels. And then I also have this vulture in flight image. And this vulture in flight image is large. I shot this with like my 20 megapixel camera. So it's 5,616 by 3,744 pixels. That's an image that will make a nice big print, by the way, if you want to go that route. So basically what I'm kind of looking towards is showing you the difference in dealing with these types of images. So I have BB Edit over here, and BB Edit is one of the software programs that you could use to do this. I'm not going to get into an extensive discussion of text editors because there are many out there. I usually use Sublime for my own work, just because I'm used to it. Atom is another really great one. For this assignment, I think BB Edit tends to work best because some text editors disable the ability to open images as code. So we're sort of selecting text editors specifically for that. If you're on a PC, by the way, you don't have the option of using BB Edit. I have heard, and I have tried it on my own machine, that Notepad++ works pretty well for this assignment. So in any case, I have this sort of vulture in flight image. And before I do anything, because what we're about to embark on is a sort of really risky, really unintentional, really chance-based artistic process. In other words, we have no idea what's going to happen, and we don't know if it's going to work. So that sounds actually kind of exciting. So let's, before we go any further, I'm going to save a copy, or just do a save as, and rename it something like Vulture in Flight. Maybe also go for Glitch 2, because I did try this before. And so now I can preview this in the preview sort of Finder preview. The Finder preview might not always be super accurate. So if you wind up with your image having like gray blobs or like not showing up at all, it could be worth it to actually open it up in Chrome. Chrome tends to do a somewhat better job of displaying these images. Why is your image not displaying? Probably because Preview is looking at it and being like, what the hell is this? Like, I don't know what this is. It's all messed up. So it's trying to help you, but in this case, we are so beyond help. That's not helpful. So, okay. So we're going to glitch this up. We're going to basically like mess it up. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open up this Nyan Cat file as well. And what I'm trying to really kind of strike home here is really there's a fundamental difference in using a small image and a large image. And so if you look at Nyan Cat, there's like, I don't know, 130 lines of code that I can scroll through. I can grab a chunk. I can cut it out and stick it somewhere else. And then I'm just going to toggle to the other file. I haven't saved it yet, so I'm also going to save a copy because I think that would be smart. And let's see what happened to it. Yep. So I can go ahead and open it in the full Finder. Yeah, so you can see we basically took a tiny chunk of code, right? I think it was like, it was a chunk about this big, and it had a massive impact on the image, right? That image looks pretty, like, glitched up. If I were making an assignment, I would say at that point, I'm probably close to done. Could I do more? Sure. Let's try another couple of chunks. So sometimes when you start adding chunks, this process is so mysterious, it actually makes it look better. That didn't happen here. So I would say every time you edit the image, it's probably a good idea to save a copy because you don't want to, if you have something good and you kind of mess with it, it's a little bit difficult to just like Control-Z your way out of it. So it looked like I did not save a copy that time. Darn, I just messed up my original. Okay, well, that's enough for that image, I guess. That's pretty baked, and I'll have to go find another copy on the internet because I did not save a copy. So that's why you should save a copy. When we look at this vulture in flight, we're going to get a really different result. So for one thing, it's just going to be, because it's so many more pixels, it's going to be way harder to just like navigate through the file and try to figure out what we're going to take out and what we're going to put back in. So I'm going to take that out. I'm down in the bottom. I'm going to try to put it somewhere in the middle. And maybe I'll put something from the top. In the bottom. Two places that you do not want to go, by the way, in any image, is you definitely don't want to mess with like the last probably 10 or 20 lines of a file. And likewise, don't mess with what obviously in this case looks like a header, right? It's the first 10 or 20 lines. The reason why you don't want to mess with those lines is that those are what are called the file header, and they actually they sort of let the software that you're using know how to open the file. So if you mess up with those, you probably will have like nothing. Like your image might not open, or when it opens, it'll just be like a big gray cube. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and save a copy. And yes, glitch 2 sounds good. Yes, replace. Okay, so then over here, oh, that's beautiful. You can see that I got a super different result. And I don't know, like, which is cooler or which looks more interesting. I think they both have really interesting qualities to them. I think that, this definitely looks more sort of like old school glitch, and this looks more like I might have done this on purpose in Photoshop glitch. It's kind of different, just different types of images. So what you may find when you're out there looking for images, my advice, actually one of my pieces of advice is that if you're having a little bit of like an issue with images not doing something interesting or not doing what you want them to do, I would try to get images from a couple of different sources. So don't get them all from the same website. Don't get them all from Google Images. Don't get them all from your camera. Because when we save a JPEG on our, like, even on our phone, sort of automatically saves JPEGs, right? Every time a JPEG is saved, it has a different encoding method. And if you're trying to combine different encoding methods together, or just working with some encoding methods may not work as well. So you might have to sort of like give yourself like a kind of like a stack, of like, I don't know, 5 or 6 images to start, and just see if one maybe works better than the other, because there is a pretty high level of mystery to this. And I guess that's kind of what I have to say about that. If I tune into the course, whoa, that's my email. Thank you. Excusez-moi. If I tune into the course, sort of like where we're headed, we're going to be continuing this conversation about resolution or pixel size and getting source images from different sources. So those 3 things that we've talked about today, we're going to continue to talk about that on Tuesday quite a bit. And we're really going to, on Tuesday, we'll spend the entire class period kind of cracking open Photoshop. That'll be exciting. And yeah, I mean, have a great time until then. Have a great weekend. Don't turn into popsicles.